You think a plague is something you catch, a cough, a fever, a rash on the back of your hand. The people of Strasbourg thought the same thing, right up until the summer afternoon a neighbor of theirs stepped out into the cobbled street in plain view of half the city and started to dance. There was no music, there was no festival. And as the hours stretched into days and her feet started to bleed through her shoes, the people watching her began to realize two things at once. She could not stop, and neither soon could they. Strasbourg in the summer of 1518 was not a happy city. It was a wealthy free city of the Holy Roman Empire, perched on the Rhine, about 25,000 souls crammed inside its walls, and most of them were hungry. The harvests had failed 2 years running. Smallpox was burning through the poor quarters. Syphilis was the new terror nobody wanted to name. And out in the countryside, the peasants were already sharpening pitchforks against their lords. Then July came in like an open oven door. So picture a narrow cobbled lane between leaning half-timbered houses, laundry strung overhead, the smell of the river, and the tanneries hanging in the heat. That's the world a woman named Frau Troffea stepped into one afternoon in the middle of that month. She didn't say a word to her neighbors. She didn't carry anything. She just walked out into the middle of the street and she started to dance. There was no music, no festival, no wedding, no saint's day on the calendar. 4 of the 6 surviving chronicles of what happened next call her by name Frau Troffea, and they all say the same strange thing. She danced alone, in silence, like she was hearing something none of the rest of them could hear. Her husband came out into the street and begged her to stop. Witnesses said she didn't even seem to see him. She danced until her legs gave out at nightfall, slept where she dropped, and at sunrise she got back up on bloody, swollen feet and started again. By the 3rd day a crowd had gathered. Hawkers, beggars, porters, a couple of priests, even a few nuns from the nearby convent. They stood at the edges of the lane and watched this woman move and move and move, with the same blank look on her face. And here's the part that, even 500 years later, still gets under your skin. By the end of that first week, Frau Troffea wasn't dancing alone anymore. Around 30 other people had joined her. Some chronicles say 34. Men, women, a few children, neighbors, market workers, strangers from across the city, all of them moving the same way, all of them silent, all of them unable to stop. Within a month, the Imlin family chronicle, one of the most trusted contemporary records of the outbreak, put the number at around 400. 400 citizens of Strasbourg, dancing in the streets, in the squares, in the open market, day and night. So the city magistrates did what any sensible Renaissance government would do. They called in the experts. The Strasbourg Guild of Physicians took a look at the afflicted, the bloody feet, the empty stares, the way they wouldn't eat or sleep, and they delivered a confident diagnosis: hot blood. Their reasoning, more or less, was this: the body was overheated, the blood had gone bad, and the only way to burn it off was to keep moving until the fit passed. So the prescription wasn't rest, it wasn't prayer, it was more dancing. The council went all in. They opened up 2 of the city's guild halls as makeshift dance halls. They cleared a public square and had carpenters build a wooden stage. They hired musicians, pipers, drummers, fiddlers, and they paid strong young men to walk among the dancers and hold them upright when they started to sag. You can almost imagine the logic on paper. Contain the spectacle, supervise it, let it burn itself out. In practice, it was like pouring lamp oil on a kitchen fire. Because everyone in Strasbourg already knew the story of Saint Vitus. Vitus was a martyr, and the folk belief along the whole Rhine Valley was that if you angered him, he could lay a curse on you that turned your own body into a punishment. A curse that made you dance and dance and dance until he decided you'd had enough. There had been more than 10 outbreaks like this along the Rhine and Moselle in the last 150 years. So when ordinary citizens walked past that stage in the square and saw their neighbors twitching to a piper's tune, a lot of them didn't see a medical treatment. They saw proof. St. Vitus was angry, and the only way to get out from under his wrath was to dance their own sins out before he came for them too. They climbed onto the stage. They joined the dancers. The contagion didn't shrink, it doubled. And now the chronicles start to darken. People were collapsing. People were getting hurt. And, according to the later accounts written by Strasbourg's own chroniclers, people were beginning to die. The Privy Council finally panicked. They tore down the stage. They threw the musicians out. They banned almost all public dancing and music in the entire city until September. And for the worst afflicted, the ones who couldn't be reached by reason or restraint, they tried one last thing. They loaded them into wagons and drove them about 30 miles northwest, 3 long days through the wheat fields and up into the Vosges mountains, to a cave shrine of St. Vitus near the town of Saverne. There, priests stood the dancers under a wooden carving of the saint, pressed small wooden crosses into their hands, and slipped red shoes onto their ruined feet, shoes painted with crosses of consecrated oil. They sprinkled them with holy water. They burned incense. They chanted in Latin, and then they waited. And, weirdly, it seems to have worked. Within about a week of the first wagons arriving at Saverne, the stream of suffering pilgrims started to thin out. By early September, the streets of Strasbourg were quiet again. The pipes were locked away. The stage in the square was firewood, and the dancers, the ones who were left, went home. Whether the saint actually healed them, or whether the whole thing simply burned itself out once it was hidden away in a mountain cave instead of paraded on a public stage, well, that's an argument that's still going on. What surviving records don't tell us is what happened to Frau Troffea. She was sent to Saverne early, maybe 4 to 6 days in. After that, the woman who started all of it just disappears from the page. So that leaves us with the question everybody asks: what was actually happening to those people? For 500 years, that answer has shape-shifted. Demonic possession, divine punishment, hot blood. In the 20th century, a new theory caught fire: ergot poisoning. Ergot is a mold that grows on damp rye. It's chemically related to LSD, and in bad years it could send entire villages into convulsions and hallucinations. Tidy explanation, except for one inconvenient detail. Ergotism cuts off blood flow to the arms and legs. It's hard to dance for a week straight on feet that the poison is already trying to kill. The American sociologist Robert Bartholomew has offered a different idea, that the dancers were a heretical religious sect, deliberately dancing to win God's favor. But the explanation that most historians lean on now comes from a medical historian named John Waller. Waller looked at that summer, the famine, the smallpox, the syphilis, the heat, the peasant revolts simmering just beyond the walls, and he looked at the St. Vitus belief that everyone in Alsace grew up with. And he argued that the people of Strasbourg didn't catch a virus. They slipped into a kind of waking trance, a mass psychogenic illness, on top of a cultural script that was already written for them. The dance, in a sense, was waiting. Which brings us to the detail historians still argue over. Because the original Strasbourg city records from 1518, the ones actually written while it was happening, don't clearly mention anyone dying at all. The number that everyone repeats comes from later, from chroniclers like Daniel Specklin, writing decades after the fact. And the number is staggering. According to those later chronicles, at the peak of the outbreak in the summer of 1518, as many as 15 people a day were dying in Strasbourg, not from any plague you could catch, not from any poison anyone could name. They were dying from heart attacks, from strokes, from sheer, grinding exhaustion that their bodies could no longer survive. They were, quite literally, dancing themselves to death, and not one of them, by every account we have, could make themselves stop. That is the strange, dark, and mysterious thing about the summer of 1518. The disease wasn't in the water, or the air, or the bread. It was in the story they already believed. If the summer of 1518 stayed with you the way it stays with me, if you can't quite shake the picture of those red shoes, or that wooden stage, or a woman dancing alone in a street with no music, consider sticking around. Subscribe, and I'll have a new investigation for you next week. And in the meantime, I want to hear from you. Ergot mass psychogenic illness, a heretical sect, something we still don't have a name for. What do you think was really moving the people of Strasbourg that summer? Leave it in the comments. I read them.